Welcome to J Life with Daniel. I'm your host, Rabbi Daniel Levine. Today we have back on the podcast Professor Dr. Andrea Mollie, who is a professor here at Chapman University studying the intersection of religion, international politics, game theory, and violence. So an expert on all things Iran and Israel that we're going to unpack in a second. Andrea, welcome back to the podcast.
Thank you, Rabbi. How you doing?
Doing well. I think, like everybody else, we were talking just a minute ago, I've been glued to the news over the past couple of days. It was quite the shock on Saturday afternoon to start hearing whispers of this Iranian attack on Israel. This is historic for a number of reasons that I think we'll get to in a couple of minutes. Before we go there, let's just unpack the scene for people that are not paying attention at all. I can lay a little bit of the ground history, and then you can pick up, you can put together the pieces that I've left out or anything else you want to add. Iran is presenting a really interesting challenge to the Middle East. I mean, even before October 7th, observers who have been paying attention have seen Iranian proxies spread their way through the wider Middle East, really reshaping. And one of the big stories we'll get is this is the really a reshaping of the Middle East in terms of different cohorts and different ally sets. And a lot of the Sunni Arab countries, right now, I'm specifically talking Saudi Arabia and Jordan and the UAE, although they've presented a much more interesting challenge in the last 2 days. They're sort of the way, at least I think of this is probably not an academic way to say this, but their hatred of Israel and America is now less than their fear of Iran. And so we've been seeing, these axes realigning. And so this has been sort of, under the radar for many years. And then obviously with the Abraham Accords a couple of years ago, this really resurfaced, this, de facto alignment between America, Israel, and a lot of these countries. And Iran, as we know, right, Iran is a funder of Hamas and the Houthis in Yemen and Hezbollah up in Lebanon and Syria. But Iran had never directly struck Israel before. So just, paint the picture. What happened in the buildup? Is this sort of because of October 7th? Is this because of Israel's recent attack on the Iranian governmental base in Syria? What really pushed Iran over the edge? Because this is a big step. I mean, this can lead to the next wider regional war. I mean, I don't want to suggest a world war, right? That's a little bit hyperbolic, perhaps. But this was a step that Iran had not taken for the last 45 years of issuing edicts of death to Israel, death to America. So wanted to throw it over to you. What is important to know in the background here?
Well, that is absolutely correct, and I like the way you depicted the whole process, and I also like the fact that you didn't mention the building as the embassy, like many people are saying these days. Also, in terms of like whether because they ignore what the building was, in fact, or because they are conveniently deciding to do it because it fits a certain narrative that is the one of cause effect, whichever, whatever put it, in which the cause of the effect being the bombing and the drones over Israel in the last couple days ago is the cause is because Israel attacked an embassy. Israel didn't attack an embassy. The building that was attacked was an annex that hosted some consular activities of the Iranian embassy in Syria. Therefore, the status of that building vis-a-vis international law is gray at the very best. I also want to remind that by international law, and Iran make this claim that they were just responding lawfully based on Article 51 of the UN Charter to an attack on a third-party soil of one of their diplomatic headquarters. Well, the international law also stipulates that such an attack can happen. It usually can happen with the authorization of the third-party country. Which is a whole problem itself, because Israel doesn't have any diplomatic relationship with Syria. So who's going to ask who? Israel is not recognized as a state by Syria. Also stipulating the exception that such an attack can happen if, and I'm saying if, the activities hosted in that particular area are of military kind. Okay, so Israel struck a military headquarters that was housed within a building that was an annex to consular activity related to the Iranian the Iranian embassy in Damascus, Syria. And this is a very long description for what you normally see on newspapers, like Israel attacked an embassy, therefore Iran retaliated. But again, it doesn't really fit a certain narrative that we've seen developing over the last few hours, in which people are, and this is really strange to me, people are siding with Iran. I mean, of all things, I get siding with Palestine to a certain extent, and the Palestinian people and Palestinian struggle. I don't get anybody siding. Why would they side with Iran? I mean, we've seen Queer for Iran parading
Yeah.
the street,
No,
which
this is
is
almost, I mean, this is
bizarre.
almost a natural conclusion of a lot of, I mean, I don't know. It almost seems like it's an intellectual game at some point on the left to try to, reduce all of this to neo-colonialism and imperialism and try to find some way in which to vindicate, places like Iran. I mean, there's a very popular left-wing podcast. It's called Breaking Points that I listen to because I'm interested. They have millions of followers and they're an American podcast, and they bring in their Middle Eastern expert is somebody who actually works for the Iranian government. So just a lot of interesting stuff going on there, which again is
Look,
really confusing.
Look, I think we talked about in our last meeting when we got together last time. We talked about this colonialist or post-colonialist theory, which to me it sounds like a glorified intellectualized version of heroes and villains. It has more in common with a Marvel movie than any intellectual endeavor, because it really simplifies the word in good and bad to an extent. Whereas if you're isolated an actor that you think is a bad actor, no matter what, then everybody that goes against that actor, no matter what level of evil they represent, is still gonna be the good guy. So when you start with the assumption that Israel is wrong no matter what they do, then of course everybody that faces Israel and go against Israel, including Iran, including Hezbollah, they're the good guys. And I think
Sure.
we get to a point where this is unacceptable. And again, I get the game, and I get the idea that in somehow Iranian reaction was, I don't say justified, but was expected because of what happened. I don't think we have to go that far as to justify a regime that kills their own people because they are walking on the wrong side of the street.
Sure, sure. No, and of course, again, there's always a bait and switch that I feel like, talking to the far left camp where, well, it's, even imperialism to impose our Western moral structures on a place like Iran. I mean, of course, this completely belies all the facts of, the Persian people, right, hating the current Iranian regime. That's a whole other story that, maybe we'll get to some other day. It was a strange attack because there's really a couple of different choices. None of them really make sense, right? Iran is not stupid, right? They presumably understand that Israel's been developing, defense systems such as,
Mhm.
of course, Iron Dome, but also David Sling and Arrow and all these other advanced systems. They know that America is not going to let anybody touch, Israel in terms of missiles. They might
Do they?
not have known this, but they probably, I would argue, did understand, right, the historic act of Saudi Arabia and Jordan shooting down missiles and protecting Israel. I mean, that's one for the history books for sure. So Iran must have known, right? It also this came out about a week earlier that something was going to happen, and so the two choices, and I've seen arguments arguing both of these, and I'm curious to throw the question to you. On the one hand, this could have been just a saving face measure from Iran, right? They have to do something to show they are not going to allow attack on them, right? To show that they are also standing up to, mean bully Israel. There's been a lot of news reports of internal news inside of Iran reporting that, dozens of Israeli soldiers were killed. And I believe, in some other Iranian news station, they were showing scenes of Chile and other, wildfires and saying, this is what we've done to Israel, right? So there's that part, right? So that's one theory, the sort of saving face theory, in which case, assuming Israel doesn't retaliate, which we'll talk about military game theory in a minute. I'm really excited to pick your brain on that. Then this might, have evened out, and Iran, can tell its own citizens, we didn't, strike out swinging. We at least, attacked Israel, and they can always lie about the actual fact. The other theory is that this was basically a test barrage to try to figure out exactly how Israel's defense system works. And next time it'll be a lot worse once they sort of gain this intel, right? Two very different theories of what was happening. But this attack was a failure if this was an attempt to save face. So did Iran think they were going to be more successful? What do you think is going on here? Because it was quite a strange attack, right? If you're going to attack, send 3,000 missiles or send 3 missiles, right? It's sort of a weird limbo period.
I do think we don't have to think, I do believe we don't have to think that linearly. First of all, by exaggerating the importance of rationality, and I'm speaking as a game theorist, so it's weird coming from me, but I don't think we need to overplay rationality when it comes to such decisions. So the mechanism that goes into developing reactions to something like that are not exactly perfect. But on top of that, I also think that we need to, these are not opposing theories. So these are, in my view, if they're presented as the only explanation, they're all wrong. But at the same time, they both hold a little bit of truth. There is a symbolic component. So Iran asked to do something, okay? The ball was on their field. They had to make a move. Well, they could have made a move using the proxies, which they traditionally do, right? They could have just unleashed Hezbollah over Lebanon from the north. They could have, in a way, pressure the Houthi to step up their attack strategies. They could have done a series of things, okay? They decided not to do it because they decided it was more profitable, in a sense, sending a signal in which they would do something directly, which nobody expected. So there's a kind of surprise factor in changing the strategy. There also the fact that, as you mentioned, they wanted to somehow test if Israel would be ready for something like that. And there's also testing the limits, which is something that you didn't say. Testing the limits with who? Well, with Jordan, Saudi Arabia, Emirates, all the other Arab countries, to see if the Abrams Accord, at least from the kind of a self-defense and security area of application, was still a thing or not. So in other words, would Jordan just don't do anything, or would they engage actively in opening their airspace to Israeli fighters and also participating into taking down the drones? They wanted to see if something like this happened, is Jordan going to side with them or we're going to side with us? Is going to take a neutral stance? What about Saudi Arabia, which is, their historical enemy in the area, even more so than Israel, if I may, and also the United States. You say something, well, they knew that United States, well, I'm not sure. Because didn't work.
Yeah, Biden, big declaration last Thursday or Friday.
Yeah, don't. This is not the 80s anymore. You're not Ronald Reagan. We don't believe you. I mean, that's a process that started with the red lines, with Obama moving all those red lines. And, if you're telling me not to do something, but there's no consequences if I do it, well, I'm going to keep doing it. And, until you stop telling me not to, either by doing something or not doing anything. Now, I'm not suggesting that the United States should have done more than what they did. But what I say is that, well, your deterrence doesn't work anymore. Nobody believes you. Nobody believes Biden, but Biden says, well, we're gonna do something if Iran decided to intervene in the conflict, because we haven't done it. And that's clear, and that's rationally clear in Tehran as much as it is in any other country of the Middle East, including Israel.
Yeah, no, it's interesting. Yeah, well, just to paint the picture, I mean, I'm teaching an American Jewish history class now. So today we were talking about, the American Jewish community pre and post 6 Day War, right? So not really a topic that has to do with current events much, until we got to, the various cohort of countries that attacked Israel in 67, and, Jordan and, Saudi Arabia sent, money and soldiers. And I almost had to stop, right? I almost never do this. I almost never pause, talking about history to talk about, the news of this weekend, but it was almost too shocking of a dichotomy,
Contrast.
exactly, right? To now, I mean, who would have thought even 20 years ago, but 50 years ago, that you would have Jordan and Saudi Arabia, teaming up to shoot down missiles shot by Iran, which 50 years ago was Western aligned. I mean, really, nobody had this on their future Middle East bingo card for what was going to happen. So it's really hard to overstate.
Absolutely. I mean, I can share my reaction with you. I was following everything on Telegram and Twitter, and the moment this thing popped on my phone, say Jordan declared their space closed, that they're going to take down every drones and missile that flies over them. It's like, what?
Yeah.
That was really expected.
Yeah, no, it's interesting. So, okay, so back to the wider military game theory perspective. Iran, according to what you're saying, correct me if I'm misrepresenting you at all. Iran possibly was pretty shocked at the Israel defensive support. Israel now is, meeting, right? You have conflicting statements from different officials, right? So we're
Okay,
playing this
absolutely.
game of, we have no idea what's actually happening and who's reporting what. We'll probably only know in a couple of days if and when Israel does something. The G7 and, England and France and America are basically now telling Israel, don't. How much is that taking into account, right? What is Israel thinking about behind closed doors in terms of all these military games that it's playing? What are the possible rewards of a strike on Iran? What are the possible detriments? If you were in the room there and they asked you as the resident military game theorist, what they should be paying attention to, what are you laying out as, here are the top couple things you have to keep in mind right now?
Okay, so that's a lot of unpacking your question. So there's a lot there. So yeah, you reconstructed the timeline after the attack. So one of the first things that the Biden administration did, was to caution Netanyahu not to do anything massive in retaliation. There was also Iran that says we consider this over, which is a bizarre statement because you don't get to decide when it's over.
Yeah,
The
according
moment you
to
launch it.
just to add to that, sorry to cut you off. According to some reporting that I saw, while Iran was launching missiles, before the missiles were intercepted, Iran went to the UN and said, "We consider this matter over." Right.
Correct.
So
Which is, again, it's pretty ridiculous if you think about it, because you're launching and they're still flying. They'll take a couple hours to get there and say like, "Oh, we're done." Again, you don't decide when it's done or not at this point. But of course, the Biden administration kind of try to suggest caution to Netanyahu. And of course, the G7, as you were mentioning. By the way, just a procedural thing, Biden administration went on and say like, we convened the G7, or the Biden administration didn't convene the G7, because the power of convening the G7 sits with the presidency of the G7, which is Italy at this point. So Biden didn't do that. And as a matter of a joke, somebody told me, well, if the president of the United States said to do or don't, you do it or don't. And well, no, ask Tehran, because they don't seem to be on the same page on that. But that's kind of a joke. But anyway, G7, of course, the countries, the member of the G7, and including the United States, are trying to see if Netanyahu, the Israel response, can be contained or can be nullified. I don't think that is going to happen for a couple of reasons. The first one is, of course, an attack of such a large scale demand a retribution. And if Israel doesn't respond, that kind of opens up the door for other attacks of that sort. They're kind of showing weakness, so to speak. On the other hand, what I was saying before in terms of deterrence vis-a-vis Iran, or the bad guys, or the rogue state, the same dynamics work for Israel too. What is the leverage? What is the United States going to be doing vis-a-vis to Israel? Are they going to suspend, the financing of the Iron Dome? I don't think so. Even more so after this. even more so because of probably the next Congress will have a Republican majority. So there's really nothing that the Biden administration has at this point in their cards to leverage Netanyahu not to respond harshly. So I think it all remains within whatever decision the Israeli government want to, whatever reaction the Israeli government feels as being the more productive from their perspective, uh, within the context of the current war in Gaza, with the possibility of opening a new front in Lebanon, and they have to wait very carefully if they want to open a long-term hostility, like active, like a hot war with Tehran or not. So there are many options. One option could be simply, reciprocate by attacking a couple of military bases in Iran. It could be by attacking proxies of Iran. It could be by attacking nuclear facilities in Iran. I don't think we're gonna get to a point where the IDF will launch an attack on Iranian cities or anything that has civilians within, because that will probably result in paying a huge price. Well, one thing that we haven't mentioned, that Israel, of course, because of the war in Gaza, is suffering a lot of pushback internationally. Public opinion is getting more and more against Israel and the way they're conducting the war, even though, we can look at the numbers there, but doesn't really matter. Opening up a new front with Tehran, with Iran, that will open the possibility of collateral damage and civilian casualty, I don't think is in the chord of Israel.
Sure.
At this point.
Although, just I don't know if this is necessarily a pushback or just a little bit of a tangent, or maybe a little bit of both. Iran intervening and sending, ballistic missiles to rain down on Israel was a huge distraction from what's happening in Gaza and really plays into Israel's hand. I mean, for about 3 days. And, one of the things, the other big story that is happening in Israel that most international news media agencies didn't really talk about is you had one of the worst increases in Israeli settler violence happen over the weekend also, right? Having nothing to do with Iran, right? You had a 14-year-old Jewish boy who went missing and was found dead, and you had these settlers going through. And so Iran basically almost perfectly played into, right, Israeli public PR, because all of a sudden now what Israel's been saying the whole time, which I agree with as somebody who's generally pro-Israel, I would, I want to ask you for your personal opinion, but this whole time, the dominant pro-Israel argument has been, this is not an Israeli-Palestinian conflict. This is not, small, poor, Palestinians in Gaza and the West Bank versus, big military Israel. This is really, right, if we go back to the 60s and 70s, the wider Israeli-Arab conflict, or now it's the Iranian, the Iranian-Israeli conflict, and it's, Hezbollah and the Houthis and Hamas and Iran, and they surround Israel, right? And those are just two completely different ways of viewing the conflict. And over the last couple of months, it really did seem like it was the Israeli-Gazan conflict, right? And Israel's the big, strong, that has airplanes and bombs, and Gazans are, these poor Palestinians living in the Gaza Strip. And now the argument, right, shifts a little bit, where now having this conversation demands a wider zoom out framework, where if you look at a map and you see where Syria and Lebanon are, and then you see where Gaza is, and then you see where Yemen is, and then you see where Iran is, right, you can understand Israel's point of view a little bit more. So sympathies for Israel, I think, almost necessarily have risen over the last couple of days, not just in the West, but again, the only thing that could have, I mean, Jordan and Saudi Arabia and all these countries have spent the last 6 months condemning Israel in the strongest words possible without ruining their own peace attempts with America, right? It's been a very strange, also going back to game theory, right? This political PR game theory that's been going on is endlessly fascinating. Iran made it so much easier for Israel now to play this, wider PR war. So this almost detracts from everything that's been happening in Gaza, right? I don't know if that necessarily contradicts what you're
Well,
saying. Yes.
yeah, I mean, yes or no. So, you certainly have a point here. Okay, you certainly have a point by saying, okay, this is evidence one that the conflict is much larger and broader than Gaza and Rafah and October 7, which is factual. Because even if we go back to October 7, it's undeniable that Tehran was heavily involved in planning, financing, training, organizing in general what went down in Israel in October 2023. As a matter of fact, the generals that were killed in Damascus were most likely to have participated in that event. So that itself was a retribution to people who were massively involved into the event. On the other hand, there's another side to the same blade, because people are scared of having a regional conflict. So part of the denial of that broader regional component is given to the fact that even the Biden administration, even the G7, they're trying to sort of like not push the narrative that this is already a regional conflict. We are already in a regional war. We've been in a regional war since October 7. Now, the fight of that war as being, localized within the Gaza Strip. But we already know that Lebanon is going to be involved at some point. We already know that the Yemen and Houthi crisis comes, even though it's not exactly only because of that, but comes in the same package as the conflict between Israel and Palestine. Uh, so where you're right on the realist perspective, but I don't think the public opinion will follow that as much as they will try to maybe isolate Israel even more to avoid to come to term with a regional war, and maybe the necessity of you know of thinking about this conflict in a much larger scenario, maybe with G7 countries get involved into that at some point. So I think there still is, for Iran, there still is enough room to try and play the narrative that this was just a reaction to what Israel is doing in Palestine. This was just a reaction to what Israel has been doing to us in Damascus, and has nothing to do with the fact that we are actively engaged in war against Israel, or in conflict against Israel. You mentioned the role of Jordan and the other countries. Well, I mean, there's always been, again, this part of what politics in Middle East is. You always have two faces, right? So on the one hand, you're not recognizing Israel, you're bashing Israel, you're siding with the Palestinians, but on the other hand, you're collaborating, cooperate with Israel, because you don't want Iran to profit out of the same conflict. And we talk about I have to admit, Jordan was unexpected to me, that sort of involvement. But I was kind of expecting it from Saudi Arabia, because we know how the relations between Saudi and Iran are tense, and they're always been. The Houthis, Yemen, it's the big contentious point. It's the hot side of a Cold War between Saudi and Iran, has always been. We talk about Iraq too. We can talk about Syria. We can talk about all these other conflicts. They're all connected to each other. And so, but going back to I'm not trying to defend my point, and you do have a point where you're saying that this might go out of control. It might eventually play in favor of Israel. But on the other hand, I think, and that connects with the problem of anti-Semitism and all the anti-Semitic tropes that are emerging like mushrooms over the past few months. I think there is still a tendency to see whatever comes from Israel is a lie. Whatever it comes to Israel, Netanyahu is scheming because he wants to have a larger conflict. And well, you think that Khamenei is not? You think that the Ayatollah in Tehran are not? You think that Assad is not scheming? So for some reason, however, the blame is always pushed on Israel, which is, Israel has a lot of problems, and there's a lot of bad choices that they've made over the years. But again, that what I observe is the double standard that
Sure.
is always going to apply.
No, 100%. And the double standard is always there. And I think Israel is, people who are following Israel, are probably used to that by now. I mean, the interesting thing, what you're saying is, it's very easy to have this two-face when everything's covert, right? So, you have Egypt, right? Just as an example, Egypt can, endlessly bemoan the treatment of Gazans by Israel, while Egypt is doing the exact same thing to the Gazans, but nobody cares because, it's not, Jews aren't involved, or the West isn't involved, right? However cynical you want to be. And then Egypt can at the same time, work with Israeli, security forces to weed out Hamas and ISIS and Brotherhood and all of that. It's a little bit different when the missile's flying in the air and you either have a choice, do you shoot that down or do you not, right? This was interesting because this almost, right, as you were saying at the beginning, Iran really didn't know, right? Iran was almost testing the waters according to one theory, and Jordan and Saudi Arabia basically laid their cards on the table, meaning all of the talk about what Israel is doing over the last 6 months that is supposedly ruining this broader Arab coalition, and the Abraham Accords have fallen apart, that's mostly seemed to be not true, right? Push comes to shove, even after 6 months of Israel, presumably, right, according to, if you ask Jordan or ask Saudi Arabia, perpetuating what, I'd imagine they would call, endless killing or even a genocide. Push comes to shove, they're still shooting down those missiles. Right. Are going to rain down on Israeli bases. That's really interesting. The other side of the coin is there are some countries that surprisingly were not involved in the defense. I saw that UAE, right, chiefly among them, United Arab Emirates, which does have formal relations with Israel, wasn't really involved. I didn't have enough time.
It was involved at an intel level, I believe.
Okay,
so I mean, for some countries, it's easier than others. They have less, let's say, political capital to spend in siding with Israel, even though it's for a very limited scope. Some other countries, they have more wiggle room. They have different interests in upholding the security component of the Abraham Accord. That's sort of like ironclad security deal that has been developed over the last few years and didn't really fell through. I mean, and I think there was some sort of maybe wishful thinking or willingness by the Iranian to try and test it. And what can happen? Okay, they take down your missiles, so they take down your drones. You now know where they stand. You can actually play that very well on the public opinion level. If you see some of the tweets that came out from those bots, they're on tweets since 2023, 2024. They were calling Abdullah as a traitor. They were calling the Hashemite kingdom as a fake kingdom, as a Mossad black op, and all these things. And what can be the long play there, I think, is very interesting, because is there a new Black September in the making for Jordan, or is Iran trying to destabilize those countries more than they're trying to bring those countries on their level, on their side? So it's certainly a chess game that is playing on different boards. So
and it also bears mentioning inside Iran also is quite unstable. I mean, there was obviously the huge hijab protests, what is this, like a year and a half ago now, right? My calendar's all messed up, right? And obviously that was repressed by the government, but those opinions didn't go away. And you see, always, I'm sort of embedded, my wife is Persian, so her entire, parents, aunts, uncles, they're all from Iran, right? A lot of them have family still in Iran, right? So it's interesting to see, obviously they're too afraid to post exactly what they, believe. But a lot of the stuff that's been coming out of Iran on social media accounts and things like that, you actually do have rallies. We've been seeing some pro-Israel rallies inside of Iran.
Absolutely.
Not from Jews, from Iranian Muslims, Zoroastrians on the ground there. And so, right, that's also interesting of Iran. I'm sure that's going into their calculus too, of knowing that their population they don't know what percent of their population is in favor of the government or wants to depose of the government. And so, right, that's probably also, I'm sure that's going into Israel's calculation now. If Israel, and by extension America, can completely topple the current Iranian regime, I would imagine that's at least, on their many folders of different plans that they're probably going over right now. I imagine there is a folder of Iranian regime topple, and somebody is bringing that up. So
Oh yeah, no, if you follow the claimant to the throne of Persia, Pahlavi, right, is been tweeting pretty much every 5 minutes something along the line of supporting the Iranian people, and Israelis are friends, and et cetera, et cetera. So there are for certain there is some motion, some movements within Iran. But yet again, so a conflict might be something that Iran is trying to avoid or want to avoid because of those, or they might be something they're trying to actually promote to stabilize the country within, or get rid of the opposition. So it's really hard to tell where a country is going to go if there is a regional conflict. So a lot of people that I hear these days are just buying into this idea of, well, Netanyahu is prolonging its political life by promoting conflict. So he's interested in a war with Iran because that's the only way he can survive. There's a clear argument that can be true, but on the other side, there's also a clear argument that the conflict might actually doom his political career. So
yeah.
it's very complicated, and again, what I said before about this theory. So these are something that can share some light in some of the reason why things are happening in a certain way, but at the same time they're limited, and there might be multiple reasons why, to begin with, why Iran decided to launch such an attack. It was massive, to the extent of, well, Iran is a powerful military country. I mean, it's powerful military in the area, but it's also highly disorganized within, because there's concurrent militaries operating in Iran. But at the same time, 300 drones and missiles, it's costly.
Yeah, and these are big. I mean, just for listeners, we're not talking about missiles the size of a football. We're talking about, I mean, some of these missiles were like the size of a minivan, or even bigger. School
Yeah,
bus.
yeah,
You can look up some of these pictures of the missiles that are showing up. I saw a picture of the Dead Sea this morning with a missile. I mean, it was literally the size of a school bus, in terms of the
yeah,
size there. And just to imagine, and ballistic missiles are much more costly than,
yeah.
this is not just, the Hamas, almost, build your own rocket, based off whatever material you find there in the tunnel that you've been. I mean, this was serious weaponry and advanced technological weaponry that was shot into Israel. That said, on the flip side, the defense was stated to cost around $1 billion. And so, right,
Right.
there also cost of the defense there. And, again, conversations
Yeah, but the
about.
cost of the defense is normally offset by the United States. So, and again, we were talking about before, there's no foreseeable future where the United States will stop supporting the Iron Dome, especially if you're pushing the narrative that if it wasn't for the Iron Dome, now we would be counting deaths.
Oh, for
We'll be
sure. I mean,
counting
I
bodies.
posted something, the only thing I posted on Facebook so far, I've been trying to collect my thoughts, but that was the first thing that came to me, Saturday night when I turned on my computer after Shabbat, and I started reading about this, is, oh my God, if it was not for Arrow and Iron Dome and all of these different technologies that America funds, we'd probably be, Israel would have shot the nukes. I mean, I can't imagine a
Correct.
situation where, 400 ballistic missiles are raining down on Israeli cities that they don't go the nuclear, or, whatever the crazy option of, Israeli
Correct.
fighter jets.
Correct.
And,
Correct.
for all the
Well,
people that are talking about, defunding Israel's military system, I mean, right, that's obviously motivated by animus towards Israel, maybe rooted by anti-Semitism, maybe just, in my
yeah,
opinion, short.
whatever that is, this attack is the end game for that sort of narrative. I haven't heard from AOC quoting or tweeting in the last 24 hours, and she was one of the people more, against
Sure.
funding the Iron Dome.
Yeah,
So
and again, yeah, sorry,
well,
saying
people are saying like people are asking why we don't have an Iron Dome, why Ukraine doesn't have an Iron Dome, why everybody doesn't have an Iron Dome. It was a proof of concept that worked absolutely perfectly. What you were saying before about testing the defense, well, part of testing the defense, I mean, you don't really have to test defense because you know from your intel what these systems are going to do in terms of attack and defense, of course. But even if you want to test it, well, uh, it's true. Now Iran knows how the Iron Dome works, but now Israel knows how Iran and what are Iranian capabilities
sure.
as well. I mean, I've read weird things about Iran having hypersonic missiles. They don't have hypersonic missiles. So there's all these weird narrative about, oh, this is just just the beginning. If Iran wanted to do something more, they could have done something more. I'm not really sure about that. Um, but we'll also have to define what do you mean by something more. So I think going back to that, I think there's a limitation to that explanation. It was certainly symbolic. It was certainly part of it was we have to retaliate. We have to do something. This is the way we're going to be doing it. Now, again, the most interesting question is what is Israel going to do? What choices? I mean, we talk about the choices, but which option is the government, is Netanyahu going to pick? And we'll know in a couple of hours, 3 hours, 4 hours, maybe a day or something, but no more than that. I don't think Israel will wait more than a day or two
Sure.
to
And just listeners, we're talking it's exactly 4 p.m. Pacific time on Monday afternoon. I'll post this in the next hour or two so people can listen. There might have to be a completely new episode in about a day or two, after we see what happens here.
Oh no,
Uh,
yeah, no, absolutely. After we see the kind of response, the magnitude of the response, but there is going to be a response. I don't think Israel will let it slide, so to speak. No, there's no options where the government would just say, okay, well, we got our shot, you got our shot, we're over. Also because it's not just these two. So one thing that I keep reading, even from people that are very well informed, they're very good, scholars in the field, they're saying cause and effect, and then we stop here. This is not cause and effect. So the problem between Iran, the conflict between Iran and Israel, it's old. It's not started with the bombing in Damascus. It's not started with October 7th either. It's it's far more remote in time. And this is just one more, move in that chess game, and there will be some sort of retaliation. I'm sure about that, and curious to see which
yeah,
one
yeah.
option was going to be.
I've been refreshing the news at probably a unhealthy rate.
Oh, me too.
I see that it's 4 p.m., so I want to let you go. But thank you so much for coming and unpacking everything. And maybe if the news demands it, we'll talk again soon.
Of course. Thank you so
Okay.
much. Thank
Professor
you.
Andrea Mollie, professor at Chapman University, studying international violence and political violence and game theory, and everything that everybody's looking for guidance and wisdom these days. So thank you again.
Thank you.